Welcome to the Moonshot Podcast, the podcast where we explore business growth, inspire innovative marketing strategies, and explore the world of company culture. Now here are your hosts, serial entrepreneurs and best-selling authors, James Philip Arbuckle and Kane Carpenter.
Who do you think has better commercials, Capital One or Geico?
That's a good question. Capital One?
I've not seen one in a while, but I always wondered if they were using the same ad agency. Like, then they had like some Viking stuff, and like you always know it was a Capital One commercial.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
In the same way, like the humor side of Geico. But random thought. What do you think about them buying Discover?
No, two initial thoughts. One, it's pretty interesting from a size and like a competitive landscape perspective, but I also don't know if it's going to get through, just considering the stuff that's been trying to get through in terms of mergers lately. This one seems particularly enormous.
I mean, it feels like it's something that would get blocked.
Yeah.
I had a question, like, why are you buying them now? I felt, I got to think like there's two different ways to look at things. There's Visa and MasterCard, who is just the processors, right? And then there's banks who use them as processors, and they're actually holding the notes, like Bank of America, MasterCard. Bank of America's handling all the actual credit facilities, and then Visa and MasterCard are, just taking the processing. American Express, they're carrying the notes, and then, I think Discover Card, I'm assuming that's its own company, its own payment network. Like, so when you buy Discover, you're not you're buying a processor and the bank facilities, correct? Am I wrong on this one?
I think you're right. I think that makes sense.
Or can you get a Bank of America Discover Card? I don't know if I've ever seen that.
I don't think I've ever seen that, yeah.
But I think that there's the payment processing side, and then there's the actual credit facilities. So I'm like, world's a little like crazy right now. In terms of, soft landing, credit card defaults are up, everything feels a little sketchy in terms of the economy. If I'm wrong, correct me, but didn't Capital One do, I don't know if it's say subprime, but maybe they didn't go after the highest credit score type of people?
I mean, that's the impression that I get, sure. Yeah.
So then what does buying Discover get Capital One right now? Let's just say they're taking a hit, potentially taking a hit on credit card defaults. Does buying Discover mask that in some way?
Yeah, I mean, you're thinking like, is it immediately accretive to the Capital One balance sheet? Maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm never going to run math that deep. I find it, let's just say like maybe there's got to be some potential risk of like distressed debt going in the next 24 months. Why would I want to buy something that might end up, I don't know. I can't wrap my head around it. I just know, like, the people that got Capital One cards, you know the people that got like the Chase Sapphires and whatever the Black City card is, and then obviously all the American Express people. American Express usually keeps things pretty tight. I know their risk, they keep it pretty tight. And obviously I think you mentioned before that like Capital One, potentially makes more money because they take on more risk. But then the rate's higher, correct?
I believe so, yeah. Yeah. Well, let me throw this question at you, James. Like, in a world that, the macro, the way it is right now, where we've got, credit at over $1 trillion or whatever credit balance is, and if you were the CEO of Capital One, where would you go chase growth?
I mean, you'd have to consume something, right?
Yeah, and so like, in kind of thinking about this topic, that was where my mind was going, where it's a funny acquisition and it's enormous. And then, yeah, we can look at it from the processing side. It becomes the third largest processor, right? Or something like that. But then I thought like, oh, maybe maybe this acquisition, considering the macro, is really the only way to add another, you know, single digits, double digits percentage growth to the business and make, their shareholders happy.
I mean, that's probably what is going on. I've been, looking around at car loan defaults, frauds going up, credit card delinquencies or some defaults went up, I think last quarter a hell of a lot. It was like some crazy number. And before this all came out, I was wondering, okay, if I had to look at people holding notes, Bank of America or Chase, Citi, American Express, Capital One, I'm like, well, who's taking the most hits there? Bank of America is typically rather conservative from what I understand. I think that's why Buffett always held on to BOA, like in terms of
Mm.
like doling out credit. They're on the conservative side, and it's maybe a little bit of a safer play. I don't know about the risk profiles of Chase and Citi. I know American Express usually keeps it pretty tight. That's a premium product they go after. I mean, anyone can get an American Express card, but they do tend to lean towards, higher net worth, higher credit score. I'm like, okay, then who's taking the hit? And I always came back to, Capital One or anyone else that has, maybe credit unions. Who are the people that took on the slightly more risky? And, that whole thought of, okay, I don't want to call it subprime. I don't know what the word is, but I'll use subprime for the sakes of this conversation. We know in the subprime stuff, whatever it is, it's more risk, but you charge more interest, correct?
Right.
So if you got those like people in the middle, they got pretty good credit. They're not like major risks. You were saying this, but they're not perfect, and the risk is not high, but it's high enough where you can charge more money. And that works in a normal market, but if you go into a major downturn, I don't know if the maths anymore.
Yeah, I think that's the strongest point that you're making, like, because we had, we talk about this off air, say offline, and that was the point that I was trying to make, is like the profile of these individuals are the ones that keep balances on their cards, and they're probably quite profitable for these companies, but it's not a normal environment. Uh, I think, and that makes this probably scary. I wasn't thinking that deeply about it, and you kind of made me realize, like, in a world where this is not normal and people's balances are extra high, say, and because I guess holding on to balances isn't, if everybody was doing well and everybody had enough cash on hand and stuff, then you wouldn't hold a balance, right? So the idea that credit balances are over $1 trillion, and regardless of the growth of the economy, etc., that's the sign that people aren't able to pay that off, or that a 20% credit line is, the is affordable, or is the only thing that people have access to make ends meet. And I think that rings alarm bells. So it is a funny acquisition.
And I go back to, we were talking about on some other podcasts, there was a huge boom in buy now, pay later, like the Klarnas and the Firm and stuff around Christmas time. Again, you're not paying for some of those were like, 4 interest-free payments. All right, that's not a bad deal, but some of those services are expensive. And you're not doing that if you have cash or credit available on a card. You're only paying those high fees if you're out of credit. And then we got through Christmas, and then you saw the credit card delinquencies go through the roof. There's a whole bunch of stuff, and then obviously the credit card debt, it continues to go up. It's not going down. And then that thing we talk about on CNBC, where the amount of people that have like $500 in their account was crazy. Like 80% of America is just broke, cash wise, anyways. And I add all that up, and it's like, man, it might be a tough time to be in the credit card business, depending on who you are. And I look at all those red flags, and it's like, well, they're all going to take a hit if things get bad, but who's going to take the biggest hit? And I'm guessing it's like probably credit unions and stuff, like maybe even Capital One, depending on, I don't know their risk profile. I don't work there. But who they seem to market to, I don't see their stuff. I don't see Capital One advertisements in like Vail and Aspen, is what I'm saying.
Right.
So I just, I felt like this is why discover now? And it's, you know, is there something coming down the line where they're going to severely underperform because they're going to start taking hits on the delinquencies? So it's how do you make up for that, or how do you dilute it? How do you make it not look as bad?
Mm-hmm.
You buy somebody,
Right. Right. Distract.
misdirection, distraction. It's curious to see, like, we always talk about soft landing and all that jazz, and soft landing, you still get some bumps and bruises. And, who knows what that's going to look like? Do I need an ace bandage or did I break a finger? Um, they got to look at who's going to take a brunt of that. And it's, what delinquencies and the charge downs and all that's one thing, but then say, what about bankruptcies? Like, I've not, man, maybe it's a piece of data. I need to look up, see if personal bankruptcies are up. I'd be curious. So it's like, what happens if there's a mass, like, we bought and spent so much money after the 7 trillion, like, we bought everything, like, jet skis, boats, second houses. Hell, we bought a second house, we bought a third house, and then we tried to Airbnb it. Now no one wants to Airbnb. Like, we bought so much stuff. And if wage growth is going to slow, well, where am I going to get the extra money to pay down the card? I can barely pay the card. Where does the extra money come from to actually make some headway at paying it down? I think that's kind of those are the things I think about anyways. Like, if you want to think about if things go the wrong way, that's how I think. Get a second job? I don't know.
I think to your point, though, it's rare that people do stuff like that, right? They'll just sit on that. It just goes back to like maybe they see an opportunity in people, if wage growth does slow, but unemployment is low enough to where people will probably stay in their jobs and sit on the balance and just sit on it and then they'll just take the 20% or whatever it is, 25% on the card. And just like, okay, that might be a good time for them to just capture fees for years and years and years.
As long as people stay employed, that's probably, it could be really good for the credit card companies in that case. I also like, we were going to talk about doing an article, another episode. Like, we start looking at, I saw some number that, I don't know, 4 to 7 million people came across the border in the last 3 years. They say as many as 4 million people could come across the border this year. And I was like, how does that affect, like, if you look at, not even so much the middle class, a lot of middle class is some type of skill. Let's just say there's a tremendous amount of unskilled labor coming across the border. How's that going to affect, working class, lower middle class? Because now, isn't that going to drive wages down, wouldn't you think?
Yeah.
I couldn't get someone to come run the deep fryer for less than $18 an hour, but now it's back down to 12. And it's like, okay, so, there's going to be wage pressure on those jobs because we have a huge influx of people in the country. I'm assuming that's how it ends up working out. Well, things are already expensive. It's hard enough to live at $18 an hour. Could you imagine driving wages down? Which, whatever, that might help inflation. But I mean, I've never seen a Ford F-150 go on. It goes on sale, but you never see like the MSRP come down, right? Does it affect a certain group of people that might also be carrying a bunch of this debt? Like, there's probably like a 2 or 3 year runway here of like ramifications of what's going on, soft landing, influx of people, bankruptcies. I don't know. I feel like I'm in a washing machine. Like, you ever get the sneaker in a washing machine that's just bouncing around? It's it's one of those things like economics. It could make sense on paper and it never happens.
Yeah.
Like, things could just
the last 5 years has taught me. Doesn't really have to make sense. Sorry.
It doesn't have to make sense, man. And but you got to factor all this stuff in, and it's what were we doing? We were spending more money, and then we'd say, I'm gonna go across the street and I'm making $18 an hour, but I'm gonna go across the street because they're short on people, and say give me $20 and I'll go. And then you would go somewhere else and try to get 22, and I think those days are over. And what we would just go and try to make more money to keep up with their spending habits. Well, now there's no more money, right? Unless you find a new type of skill or some type of value, right?
Yeah.
It was a dangerous game to play, and a lot of people played it, and we didn't really, if you look at the 80% of people that don't have much money in their bank accounts, all that money that was pumped into the system, the unemployment, all this stuff we got, the wage growth, all these things, and we just spent it. Some people did like put the money away, they paid down debt, they made their life better, but I would say a bulk of people didn't. And now that there's no more money coming, where's that going to leave people?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. Sounds like I should buy American Express stock. Oh man.
I mean, that's a small caveat here, but or side note, but I don't know if I don't know the deal well enough to know if there's a breakup fee, but it could just be like let's announce something, let's announce something, manipulate the market slightly for a second, that misdirection thing, and then just pay the breakup. Who knows?
I'd just be curious to see if in the next 6 months, look, if credit card delinquencies are way up, it's going to hurt somebody. Are you telling me that doesn't show up on the balance sheet?
Yeah.
So it's we saw that report last month, and it's like, okay, but it's at some point someone's going to have to say, okay, we took a hit over here, and it's like, well, I guess maybe that's going to happen next quarter. The earnings call is going to come out and say, hey, took a $7 billion hit over here on this. Like, so we got the data that it's happening. We've not seen what the repercussion is yet.
Yeah. I guess you could throw in too. Like I don't know the space well enough, but private credit is going crazy now too, right? So wonder how that plays into all this as well.
You wonder like how much other debt is out there that's not reported.
Right.
So again, it's like you think of the private lenders. I think they call it dark money, or like I don't know, all these other like, there's ways to get money out there that's not on, like no one knows. It doesn't show up on a credit report or whatever you want to call it. And then a lot of the buy now pay later stuff I think doesn't show up on a credit report. Not
Yeah, I
100%
don't think
sure.
that does. Yeah.
I think only if you become delinquent. I read. I'm sure some of them report, but not all of them. So we're looking at this debt, and it's like, well, how much other debt's out there?
Right.
And again, when people are doing the crazy job hopping and sticking around job 6 or 9 months and hopping somewhere for 20 grand more, and they didn't just like take the 20 grand more and say I'm going to stuff this into my 401k. It's that money got spent,
No, yeah, you're absolutely right.
and that worked while it worked, but now it's like, I remember, if you think about 2006, 2007, there's a lot of people making a crap ton of money in the mortgage industry. And you'd run into people that are making like 150 grand a year, and Kane, talking to them, they're worth like 50, maybe like 40. But at that period of time, things were going nuts, and they were making an abnormal amount of money. And I'd have to ask them, like, so let's just say this whole thing blows up, and you got to get another job somewhere making 150. I came back at that time, and for our recruiting companies, we're placing CFOs at 150.
Mhm.
And these people weren't CFOs, like not even close. Maybe you could do it in sales, selling something, but no one could ever answer the question, like, if you had to do something else making 150, and they couldn't. And I ended up seeing those people, working at bartenders and working in restaurant management and stuff years later for like 60, 70 grand. Problem is they built the whole lifestyle around 150. And it was a short-lived thing, and then, obviously they had repercussions when the economy crashed, but as people were doing the jumping around jobs and trying to get these big raises, it's, well, what happens when you lose your job now and you're making 150, but the next job offer is going to be 115? Like, things that I witnessed in, to be honest, like even like 2000, 2001, you saw it again 2007, 2008, and it's like I would say a bulk of people don't really plan around the possibility of, being out of work for extended period of time and or having to take a pay cut. Like they will build their life around the maximum amount of money that they're making right now. So, the best thing for the whole world is keep everybody employed and let's not see the 5 or 6% unemployment, because if we do, what do you think that's going to look like?
Yeah, the trickle down on that would be scary.
It would be, because when you talk to companies, most people will say they ended up spending a lot more money on people than they wanted to in the last 2 to 3 years. And we see it on the outplacement industry where, you know, the last in that's kind of the first out. Like if you were hired in the last 12 to 18 months, it's a high probability you're one of the first people to get let go in a layoff.
Yeah.
But that also came with a tremendous salary too. And if things slow down, someone's going, I'm not paying you 150 anymore. I can get this for 110. And you think about company books, you do have the 10 people and you're saving 400 grand a year plus. That's a lot of money, dude.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And well, the problem is like your whole life's built around 150. So I don't know. I there's so many data points. I'm trying to factor all this stuff in, and it's like back to the economics part where, on paper this could all make sense, but it doesn't mean it's going to come true. But when I'm looking at my investments, I have to say I have to be aware of all this.
Right.
So
of course.
I don't know. Anything else to close this one out?
No, I mean the only other thought I have is that it's going to be interesting from a competitive. I'm back to the initial point. Like I don't think this gets through, right? In a world where whatever it was, Spirit and Jet Alaska or JetBlue, whatever it was, that doesn't get through. Well, I don't think this gets through. But it's interesting for the moment.
I mean, they either said we got to try, or they're just trying to. Maybe they got some losses coming, and this is a distraction. I don't know.
Yeah, or scare the big players a little bit, right? Like, look, we could merge and we could be a big number 3 player. So your duopoly or whatever isn't really as set as you think.
I wonder, like, I don't know if I even know anyone that has a Discover card. Have you ever thought about getting a Discover card? I thought that was like for my parents. Like, you got a Discover card and you shopped at like Sears and JCPenney. Obviously, that's not true. I don't know if I've ever seen, like, I've never been out somewhere at dinner and someone, like, if you're playing credit card roulette with the tab, no one's ever thrown their Discover card on the table. Now I'm curious. I got to go look at who is the average Discover card user. Card user. Have you seen one? Oh shit, you got one.
No.
Here I go again, making fun of somebody,
sorry.
and it's like,
no, I don't, but I'm sure I've seen them.
I have not, but anyways, we'll catch you on the next one, dude.
All right.